Right, I'm with Senator Lyndon Farnham, who will soon be an extinct species if the Electoral Commission has its way. The answer is 42. What was the question? That's basically what it's all about. What are we trying to solve here with reform?
We're trying to we're trying to produce some new ideas for electoral reform. I think the main objective is to reduce the number of states members.
Is that necessary, in your view?
I think so. Whether 42 is the right amount, it's a bit concerning under the current ministerial responsibility. That might be a little bit light. Maybe 44 would be an appropriate number, but my ultimate objective is to ensure that the people of Jersey actually choose rather than have something foisted upon them.
If this electoral commission wasn't going on, would you be campaigning for reform?
Yes.
The particular area, obviously you're a senator and you've campaigned specifically, we'll talk about that, right? Are people underrepresented, not represented properly? What's the issue?
Well, I think our representation is very good. I think people are very well represented. If you do the figures and compare them with other jurisdictions, they come out pretty favourably for the electorate, and also we are all very accessible. I think more accessible than many other democracies in the Western world.
Your particular proposals are basically in line with what's being produced, but except that you want senators retained.
Well, to be clear, I wouldn't say I'm ambivalent, because I think there's a place for the island-wide mandate, but we'll come on to that in a minute. What my first concern is that we get the consensus of the electorate. For example, the problem I have with what's proposed is not so much what is being suggested, but the fact is that we're going to have a referendum to ask people whether they agree with the 6 constituencies. We're going to ask them whether they want to retain the constables. But for some reason we're not going to ask them the same question about the senators, which I find rather odd. Be another simple third question. It's a yes or no, isn't it? Do we want the 6 constituencies? Yes or no. Constables? Yes or no. Senators? Yes or no. So that's what I'm campaigning for, and that's what I've always campaigned for. And that was my big issue with what the states did last year, when they reduced the number of senators from 12 to 8 without proper public consultation.
I've made a submission to the Electoral Commission, and strange enough I said that senators, my preference would be they should be kept in some form or other. It wasn't quite the same form as you, and I think my reasons are slightly different, but they talk about the island mandate. Have you ever been mandated in the States? In other words, do you always take your own decision and make your own mind up? But have you ever been mandated? A group of people come to say, look, we want it this way, and they don't necessarily agree. That's what mandating is.
I think I'm quite an open-minded politician. There are views that are my own, and there are views that I would take after seeking advice from certain areas of the electorate, because I believe that I was voted in for a number of reasons. One of them, people voted me because they agreed with some of my policies and some of my views, but also I'm there to represent some of the people's policies and views, so I'm quite happy to...
But it's that interface, that's the thing that bothers me. I'm Joe Public, I've got a vote, and it's how I get my votes, my views heard and represented. It's my representation. That's what politicians say. I want to represent you. But when it comes to the crunch, they don't represent you. They represent themselves. They're in the States, they've got access to the power base.
Yeah.
They can represent themselves, but how do you actually take on board the views of the voter? How do you actually engage with them?
In a number of different ways. It's usually by direct communication with either individuals or groups, or organisations, or groups representative of certain areas of business or society. Some of them are better at political lobbying than others.
But 12,000 people voted for you, or about, I think it was 12,000 in the central.
Just over 11,000.
Yeah. 17,000 voted for Senator Balash, who topped the poll. Now, it's not a huge difference, but you've got a significant number of people voting for it. The bottom end, as we all know, there are deputies in with just a couple of hundred. Lots of people haven't got any votes at all and didn't get elected. So there's a very wide divergence, and this electoral reform which is going on is trying to equalise that, isn't it?
Yes, and I think it would achieve that. If we were to have, for example, 6 constituencies, each electing the same amount of members, I feel that could be quite good. It would be fairer and more even for the electorate, one argument. But it seems to be also prudent to retain the different classes of states member. You see, I can't accept the argument that it's okay to have 2 classes of states member but not 3, because I think we should either have multi-classes or 1 class. And I can't understand, there's obviously a strong lobby to retain the constables, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I won't necessarily mind if senators go, if that's what the public want, but at least we should be asking the question.
Of course, if we're having 6 large constituencies, if it's or the equivalent of deputies only, it's 6 senatorial elections, effectively, is what we're asking for, isn't it? Is that manageable?
Yeah, well, you mean the 6 constituencies, yes, as proposed?
They'd have 6 or 7 or 8 seats, whatever.
6 or 7, I think. But yes, I think that is manageable. Yes. But as an alternative, let's say we have a referendum and I persuade the Electoral Commission, or the states persuade the Electoral Commission to put that extra question on. And the public want to have 6 constituencies, and they want to retain the constables, and they want to retain the senators. So we take that on board. Here's a suggestion of how it could be done. Instead of having 6 constituencies with 5 deputies, we have 6 constituencies with 4 deputies. We retain 12 constables, and we have 6 or 8 senators, as we do, as we're going to have anyway at the next election. That would be, we had 6 senators 42 or 8 senators 44. That is one suggestion, because a lot of people seem to think that retaining the senators is going to be logistically impossible, because they're thinking of 12 or 16 or 18 senators and how do you elect those on one day, but that's not feasible. I think we could do it that way.
Well, of course, however many you're choosing, you don't have to vote for all of them, so you could limit the number of votes. If there were still 8 senators, you could vote for 3 of them.
Yeah, of course.
You could always limit that. The end result, do you honestly think, whatever system is it going to improve the standard of government? Is it really, Paul Workman always blames his tools. Is it the standard of the member themselves?
Yes, absolutely, Mike. And there wasn't, what's wrong with every political system is the calibre of the politician that works within it. And I think although we've had some very good politicians in the past, we've also had some fairly poor politicians. And in my opinion, we've had some lazy politicians, and we've had politicians that just aren't prepared to commit themselves to their duties. So that tends to be the fault, not so much the system.
I was interested that you adopted the Privy Council rule for a route to take a petition, because they talk about a bicameral second chamber. Well, of course, the Privy Council, this is one of my hobby horses, it's the first chamber actually. It's where all legislation from this island has to be approved through. And I think that was quite significant. Why did you do that?
I did it because I felt very strongly about the decision the states had made. But the prime objective of my actions then was to try and, I suppose, buy some more time so the issue could come back to the states when they'd had a chance to reconsider actually the ramifications of what they were doing. I knew in my heart that the Privy Council were unlikely to recommend to Her Majesty that my petition was accepted, but it did mean that the ratification of the law by the Privy Council was delayed long enough for the states to have one more debate. How
did you arrive at that format of petition? Did you just dream it up, or was it standard?
No, there is a protocol for presenting a petition to the Privy Council. In actual fact, since my petition was presented, they've tightened it up slightly. They've made it a little bit more prescriptive of how petitions. I'm not sure if it was a direct result of what I did, but I think they found it perhaps problematical that a petition could be presented, causing the delay to the introduction of legislation. So they've been a bit more prescriptive about timescales in presenting them.
The format that you used, in fact I used afterwards for a petition of mine about the house, the work, housing and immigration control project. So I used the format, and that was rejected by the Privy Council. But this idea, it sort of just hints at the international nature of Jersey government. So much more of Jersey government is becoming, we've now got a semi-official foreign minister that he has never been to the States to get a mandate, but he speaks for the whole island. He's never been elected on those specific issues. He does the job. That sort of tendency is the sort of area that worries me as far as the state is concerned. It's not really being addressed in a very adult way. International matters. What do you think of that?
I think it should be formalised. It's a very important part of the role of our government, and we need to, if anything, formalise it.
Again, the crunch. I heard a UK minister talking the other day about the difference of policy that they might have and the overseas territories. Well, the same could apply for Jersey. We might have disagreements on international policies, and we might want to express a view which is contrary to the UK view. In fact, I heard Senator Bash also expressing a view on that. That is always a possibility, but is it something that ought to be accommodated within our system? In other words, the public, this is my worry, is the Joe public, how does he get to say what our view is on international matters?
That's a very good question. Firstly, I think the public expect to be represented overseas, expect to have the island's interests, the island's differing interests represented overseas, and I think what the Chief Minister's Department has done now by giving an Assistant Minister responsibility for the relationship, not overall responsibility, because in the constitution of the current form of the government, Chief Minister's Department is responsible, so ultimately it's the Chief Minister that's responsible. But it's an important conduit. It's about talking and negotiating and making sure we're there to put our case forward. Because quite often, in the past, as I'm sure you know, Mike, we haven't had a say. Decisions have been made about us without any input, so it's important to have the input.
The other thing about these issues is that they start off as a sort of a local issue and they become an international issue. And even within the island, an issue like, say, Plymouth, it's a parochial matter, it's a local St. Juan matter. I think you live in St. Juan's. It's a local St. Juan matter, but it's now been made an all-island issue. If you, again, back to the mandate thing, the public participation, at what stage do you take on the view of the public? If I came to you and said, well, I'll express the view one way or other on Plymouth, well, what would you do with my input into you? Would you regard it, disregard it? Would you?
I try to regard all the input I get. I try to consider matters very carefully. And I will try to engage with as many people as I possibly can. I know very many people from all walks of our society that I will speak to on different issues, and I try to get a good feel of the mood. Of course, I can never represent everybody's views accurately, and what I think is a good idea, other people will think it's an appalling idea, and vice versa. So I try and just take a measure of the people's views, and of course there will be times when I have my own firm view on something, and I will want to follow that.
The Electoral Commission so far, you're more or less going along with it, and I'm surprised to hear you say that if the senators go, then that be it. You won't carry on the fight.
Can I just clarify my position? I would like the public to be able to choose, if you like, what they want. If the public say they don't want senators, the majority of the people say that, then I will go along.
But if they're not asked, you won't know.
But if they're not asked, we don't know. And that's a big issue. Let's ask, why do not the Electoral Commission want to ask the people about senators? I suspect it's because they know the answer, because I suspect the majority of people, if things haven't changed since all of the research I did a year ago, or sorry, a year and a half ago, then I think the majority of people would want to retain the senator.
I'm a bit surprised that the Commission has put the question about why haven't they said one way or the other? There's a bit of a cop-out, really, isn't it?
Well, and that's why I tend not to be a fan of referenda, generally speaking. In fact, electoral reform or the reconstitution of a legislative assembly is one of the few things I would have supported in, because it can be seen as a way for politicians to absolve themselves from making difficult decisions. But it is curious, isn't it, why they would only ask those two questions, not about the senator. And I think it's because they've decided that the island-wide mandate is no longer required. And that's their decision. That's what they've come up with. I disagree with that. I think we ask the people.
If their plan does succeed and we have large constituencies and we retain constables, which seems to be the preferred option, you'll finish up with St Helier being divided in two, with half a constable for each half.
Yeah.
And you'll have country parishes, the northern parishes, you'll have a conglomeration of 4 parishes, will have 4 constables. Now they'll be so over-represented in the states, this whole process will be made a bit of a mockery on.
I think the electorate are not, they're not They're not daft, and I think they will realise this. So the danger is, I see, that with what's suggested we could end up with very little change, because if it is rejected, when people, as we get closer now to sort of D-Day, people are starting to give more consideration to this, and I'm hearing more and more concerns coming forward along similar lines as to you've just suggested, as people are beginning to actually work out what it could mean.
Well, they're creating super parishes, really. That's what they're creating.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the power is unfortunately with the country parishes, the northern country parishes.
Well, ironically, because the districts are based on parishes, I think it probably weakens the argument for keeping the constables in, because you've got parish representation in the districts and parish representation with the constables. Had the super constituencies been new electoral boundaries that weren't based on parish boundaries, that would have made a stronger argument for keeping the constables there.
We're going to wind up because you're disappearing soon, but one last question, if I may. I've got a bee in my bonnet about 20,000 people with housing and work qualifications who don't live in the island, but generally speaking don't vote here either. Should they have a vote in Jersey? American elections going on at the moment. A lot of Americans in UK voting in the
I'm sorry to say, I'm not sure I understand the question.
There are 20,000 people, we are told, who have housing qualifications and therefore can work or live here, but they live outside the island. But they don't, most of them don't have a vote here. If they've left after 5 years or more, they've lost their right to vote. Why should they lose their right to vote?
Generally speaking, I don't think people should ever lose the right to vote. But I don't agree people should be made to vote either.
Okay, we're going to leave it there.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.